So I collect power armor in Fallout 4. This you're seeing is nothing compared to the collection I had in my old playthrough. That playthrough being lost due to a folder mix-up involving the recycling bin. Oops. But looking at this brought up the thought of how much power armor is actually in Fallout 4. Now there's a good reason I didn't say in the Commonwealth. I was referring to the game in general. This is because the game itself has lore explaining why there is so much in the actual region. The US military had extensive operations or staging within the Commonwealth. So if power armor is everywhere in the Commonwealth, according to the game's lore, what's wrong with that? Well, nothing with it being everywhere. The real problem comes when you look at how many people can actually use it. According to both Fallout 3 and New Vegas, using power armor requires training from someone who is an expert in its use, or from a fully realized VR simulation. As it is heavy military equipment, if you use power armor wrong, you will likely hurt yourself. And you won't be able to maneuver nearly as well. This pretty much means only a handful of people in the Commonwealth should be using it regularly. Let's look at some scenarios, shall we? Let's start with the military scenario. Say we assume that quite a few US soldiers survived the initial bombings and passed down their knowledge to their children. I cannot see it spreading to more than a few families, mostly because not every soldier is going to have learned it properly or have actually taught their children. And the same goes for their children as adults. Whether this is because of neglect, early demise, or just time constraints is frankly irrelevant. Even over generations, just as many would fail to teach or learn the ability, meaning the increase in numbers would be negligible. So, in the long run, this scenario would probably only produce a handful of trained power armor users. Moving on to the VR scenario. There does not seem to be any virtual trainers within the Commonwealth, with the exception of the memory loungers, at least as far as I can tell, assuming that's what they were originally for. Which, considering the military was stationed everywhere in and around Boston, that is probably where they came from. But those units have been heavily modified over time for a completely different purpose. So, unless we assume that pre-Memory Den everyone and their granny was using those things for power armor training, which I find highly unlikely, that scenario is producing a total of, hold on, let me check my math. Oh yes, that's right, 0 trained power armor users. The gunner scenario. Now, it's unlikely, but not impossible, that the gunners were teaching people how to use power armor left and right. However, the gunners do not like it when someone leaves their ranks and takes other similar work in the Commonwealth. They are also fairly strict in both their discipline and ranking, supposedly. There is no way in the world they would let somebody leave their ranks with a suit of power armor. At least not alive. Meaning, they're likely only to train people who are both of significant rank and that they can trust implicitly. At least usually. Since the gunners don't seem to force people to stay in their ranks, it is possible a few people learned power armor use from them and then left their ranks without taking the armor. As if they took the armor with them, the gunners would at least put a bounty on their heads. So this scenario might produce a small handful of trained power armor users. The Atom Cats scenario. You know, I could honestly see these cool cats teaching anyone who wanted to learn the power armor strut within reason, you dig? Oh. However, given their location, constant harassment by gunners and raiders, and odd reputation, I can't see a lot of folks venturing all the way to the cat's garage under the hypothetical belief they could get power armor training. That is, assuming the cats would actually be willing to teach it to just anyone. They did teach a few Minutemen during the fall of Quincy. However, that was as a favor to Sturgis, who was already pretty much in their clique. There's also nothing to indicate they taught the inhabitants of Warwick Homestead, even though they've been fairly close allies with said farm for a while, and power armor would greatly help in defending their settlement. So this scenario, once again, might produce a small handful of trained power armor users. The Brotherhood of Steel scenario. No. Just no. The Brotherhood do not train outsiders in the use of power armor outside of very specific scenarios. It is honestly some kind of twisted miracle they do not attack you on sight when you are wearing power armor and are not a member. Even if they had been in the Commonwealth from the start, this scenario produces absolutely zero non-Brotherhood power armor users. The Minutemen scenario. While some former Minutemen use power armor, we don't know exactly when they were trained. So we can't be sure they didn't learn it after the Minutemen's first collapse or before joining the Minutemen. And even if they did learn it before said collapse but after joining, there is nothing to indicate power armor usage was widespread amongst the Minutemen within the vanilla game. In fact, I'd argue from everything we see and hear, it is likely the exact opposite, and the vast majority of Minutemen forces did not utilize power armor. If we assume that those likely rare Minutemen who could use power armor properly were willing to spend their own time and train other Minutemen in its use, there likely either weren't enough of them, or enough time to do so at a large scale. Especially since the Minutemen were always answering the call. This scenario produces maybe a few trained power armor users. The Railroads scenario. The Railroads specialize in intel and personnel extraction. Oh, and being murdered by Nurbit. I swear they're like Fallout 4's version of the Omertas for him. Even their heavies don't use power armor, with the possible exception of the sole survivor. This scenario produces zero trained power armor users. The Institute scenario? I am honestly still not sure what the actual hell the Institute was trying to accomplish in this game. I can see no reason they would give power armor training to the people they routinely mass murder, kidnap, and mutate for no real reason. Since they are supposed to be the Commonwealth's high-tech, genius-led faction, they wouldn't. So this scenario produces zero trained power armor users. Raiders? Wait, what? Why is this section even here? Okay, most raiders don't care about anything other than drugs, caps, and their own sadism. They wouldn't even teach each other if they could. Because if a raider who could use power armor taught one who couldn't, the newly trained raider would likely turn on their teacher and either kill them for their bosshood or be killed by the teacher, which would result in no more trained power armor users than before. Maybe less if they managed to kill each other. This, scenario produces zero trained power armor users. The pre-war ghoul scenario. Honestly, this would almost certainly just be an extension of the military scenario. Some pre-war ghouls certainly started out as soldiers and could still teach it to people. However, considering the treatment of ghouls in general, I find it very unlikely non-ghouls would seek them out for training. This scenario produces very few trained power armor users. All told, the number of trained power armor users in the Commonwealth should be maybe a small percentage of the Commonwealth's inhabitants, if that. Now I'm going to make a list of the non-Brotherhood people I know that should be trained in power armor usage. The Male Soul Survivor, Sturgis, Preston, Duke, Roxy, Rowdy, Blue Jay, Johnny D, and there are a handful of characters like Slag, Clint, Tessa, and Ivy who should have it, but I'm not sure where they learned it. That's all I can think of, and I skimmed through every named character page on the wiki just in case. Now, given everything I have gone over, I have a question for Bethesda. And my question is simply this. Why can almost everyone in the Commonwealth use power armor roughly as well as a trained soldier? Every adult human, late-gen synth, or non-feral ghoul can use power armor without any kind of penalties. We know this because every companion and every single settler can hop in a set. And any random NPC, be it merchant, raider, or anything else, can also take a suit for a joyride. This is one of the most obvious and ridiculous lore breaks in Fallout, and that is saying a lot. Personally, I believe it would have been better to make people who can use power armor in the game fairly rare outside of the Brotherhood and Atom Cats. But I'm just a voice coming out of a floating Minecraft mask, so I could be missing something. Okay. The obvious reason Bethesda did this was for gameplay, I think. For instance, allowing companions to use power armor. which actually might make it worse. Now, I fully admit I have no game design experience. However, Strong, the adorably naive super mutant, acts as a follower with all that entails, including inventory and commands. And Codsworth, the best companion in the game, is the same. So are any robot followers from
Mayhem of the Mechanist.
making all of them NPCs. And yet they will not, cannot, use power armor. This is obviously because as a super mutant and robots, they can't fit in the armor. And while other companions can use power armor without a fusion core, we also know settlers won't use it without a fusion core. Although I've heard rumors it's possible, I've actually never seen it happen in more than 1,500 hours of gameplay. Settlers, aka NPCs, can clearly be flagged to not use power armor under certain circumstances. Now, all this taken together tells us most NPCs can at least theoretically be restricted from using power armor under multiple different circumstances. This is all why I titled the video what I did. A paradox can be defined as a person, thing, or situation that exhibits inexplicable or contradictory aspects. And this situation almost certainly qualifies. Honestly, everything I've gone over so far is made so much worse by the fact that we know exactly where the male Soul Survivor received his power armor training. The United States military, which somehow makes the Minutemen questline worse. Imagine if during their questline, the Minutemen who were slowly building their forces in the Commonwealth hit a wall in their progress because the number of super mutants in the Commonwealth had been significantly increased by the Institute's malicious incompetence, or the gunners were growing stronger over time. And you, as the only qualified available person, have to choose to either dedicate your time and resources to training your men in the use of power armor, which would entail first verbal instruction leading into practice in and around the castle, then on to acquiring multiple sets of armor, preferably T-45, from a hidden military base, and then leading several small teams of armored Minutemen on different, increasingly difficult combat missions to gain experience with the armor. You would have to do this several times to make sure anyone you trained would be qualified to train others. Or locate a set of military VR trainers and either go through a grueling and dangerous high-level dungeon protected by still active military robots, who do not recognize the authority of anyone not directly involved in whatever was going on down there, so they will not let you pass without a fight. Or make the hard choice to take the units in Good Neighbor by force if necessary, which would greatly strain your developing friendship with Preston, and cost you the respect and loyalty of at least a handful of Minutemen. There could also be an option to simply buy the Memory Den's units and hire the doctor who modified them to alter them into what you need, which for game balance reasons should cost an immense amount of caps, and I mean an amount difficult to acquire quickly with even Spectacle Island and Sanctuary water farms. Doing this would have a serious side effect. It would bring you into direct conflict with the Brotherhood of Steel. They would launch an attack on the castle in an attempt to confiscate the VR units and large quantity of power armor, which you would have to fight off, probably losing several men or damaging the castle in the process. This would be what eventually leads you to aiming a metric boatload of artillery at their Tomorrowland Sky RV, after which you would have to lead your armored Minutemen to the airport to mop up the remnants and either end the threat they pose once and for all, or offer aid to the survivors through an absurdly hard series of speech checks. In summation, the vanilla power armor usage in Fallout 4 both makes no sense and is a massive missed opportunity, especially considering an entire DLC in Fallout 3 revolves around getting power armor training through a VR sim. Well, I can't think of a proper way to end this, so I'll just say, thank you for listening to my inane ramblings.